begin with some positive news that is coming from India's neighborhood after a period of tension. China today said that its relationship with India has witnessed new progress. The statement was made by China's foreign ministry. The spokesperson said that ties with India hold great potential and have been developing with a sound momentum. These comments come after recent high-level meetings between both sides in recent months and after the 73-day-long Doklam standoff around this time last year. And it seems like India is planning to make the most of this period of thaw. WION has learnt that officials from India and China are planning a high-level meeting between the leaders of the two countries. Remember, we told you first. This means that there is a possibility of a face-to-face meeting between Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping sooner rather than later. This is being seen as an effort to reset ties after a period of tension over border violations. We've been reporting that here on WION, and now we're looking at things on the mend. India's National Security Advisor Ajit Doval recently held talks with a top official from China's Communist Party. Both sides agreed to maintain the pace of high-level exchanges. Last week, India offered to sell soybean and sugar to China. Remember, these two commodities have become a casualty of the trade war between the US and China. Reports say Indian External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj and Defence Minister Nirmala Sitharaman are also scheduled to pay a visit to Beijing this month. A lot is developing, and you have to watch this space for the very latest on how things change between India and China. President Donald Trump of the US, for one, does not agree with this assessment. He declared mission accomplished. But he did not shed any light on what exactly was the mission and what was accomplished by these missile strikes. What happens now? Does the West have a game plan? Is there a coherent strategy? Trump's ambassador in the United Nations, Nikki Haley, gave some hints.
The United States of America will not allow the Assad regime to continue to use chemical weapons. Last night, we obliterated the major research facility that it used to assemble weapons of mass murder. I spoke to the president this morning, and he said if the Syrian regime uses this poisonous gas again, the United States is locked and loaded. When our president draws a red line, our president enforces the red line.
Stirring words, but lacking any detail about the way forward. In fact, it left the impression that the next chapter in the Syrian civil war has not been written yet. The Trump administration's decision to assert further military muscle will depend on what President Assad does. Earlier on Friday, just hours before the missile strikes, Trump gave an entirely different impression. He indicated that he wanted out of Syria. He said, and I quote, "America does not seek an indefinite presence in Syria. We cannot purge the world of evil or act everywhere there is tyranny." So is all this just to divert attention from America's real goals in that country? Although the US has lost the game to the Russians there, it still has irons in the fire and strategic aims to achieve. This game is not over for America, not by a long shot. The US is hoping to win through diplomacy what its allies and partners have lost on the battlefield. Let's take a look at what America wants in Syria. It is hoping to win acceptance of a Syrian election process minus President Assad. It wants inclusion of pro-US groups in a future reconstituted Syrian government. It wants greater autonomy for Kurdish-dominated northern Syria, continued American control over the Syrian oil fields in the Kurdish areas, and this will ensure that it controls all future pipelines out of Syria. Yes, this war too is about oil. And Iran. America apparently sees a foothold in Syria as crucial to countering Tehran. Remarks by former high-level American officials confirm this. Washington also believes that by holding its ground in Syria and telling the Russians that it is determined to see President Assad go, it could leverage the economic embargoes against Moscow. Wishful thinking, some would say. We'll have to wait and see. In the theatre of war, theories abound, and this one relates to Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Just what is he up to, crisscrossing the globe? Last month in Washington, D.C., he told the Time magazine, and I quote, "Bashar is staying, but I believe that it isn't in Bashar's interest to let the Iranians do whatever they want to do." The inference was clear. Removing the Syrian president was not top priority anymore for Saudi Arabia. It was in line with the thinking in Western capitals. Many Arab countries, including Egypt, also believe that priorities have now changed. But 10 days ago, on an official visit to Paris, the very same Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia sang a different tune. He said that his country would back any effort to overthrow Bashar al-Assad. Listen in.
كان سؤالكم على مشاركة السعودية في عمليات ضد النظام في سوريا. بلا شك إذا كان الأمر يستدعي أن نشارك حلفائنا في عمليات ضد النظام في سوريا لن نتأخر عن ذلك.
His language left unclear exactly what role the Saudis could play in an attack on Assad. It was probably deliberate. The French want to hit Assad, and this desire was triggered by the chemical attack on Douma on the 7th of April. They went ahead with it. But this also goes back to 2012. The French wanted to get militarily involved in Syria then. They couldn't because then President Barack Obama had backed out. As a former colonial power in Syria after the First World War, the French probably believe that they have a responsibility to their former position. But what explains Prince Salman's shifting position? The Saudi assessment was most likely this. They would join any strong international effort to destabilize Assad, but if that did not materialize, they would ensure that lines of communication with Assad remained open. Make the most of what you get. At the heart of this strategy is the belief that they can appeal to Assad's Arab origins and weaken his alliance with Iran. That is adversary number one right now, the bigger devil. Iran's continued entrenchment and increased strength in Syria is a worse prospect than dealing with the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. This was a point underscored during the Arab League summit on Sunday, where Iran was labelled public enemy number one. Secret contacts between the Saudis and the Syrians had already taken place. Ironically, the Lebanese Shia group Hezbollah told the world about this. Its chief, Hassan Nasrallah, said that the Saudis and the Syrians had met someplace or the other. He said, and I'm quoting, the Saudis suggested that the Syrians sever relations with Iran and with the resistance Hezbollah. In exchange, Riyadh would stop supporting rebels and pay billions of dollars to rebuild Syria. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be landing in Stockholm to participate in the first ever India-Nordic Summit. It's the first of its kind event. And WION is tracking the news and the newsmaker, and we'll be reporting from Stockholm. And while we're there, we also decided to take a look at what else we could look at in the Swedish society that could be replicated in India. Many of us in urban India are using digital payments for our daily transactions, like hiring an Uber, for instance. But in Sweden, almost all transactions are done digitally. Notes and coins are a thing of the past, and Sweden is leading the race to become the first completely cashless economy. Is this transformation the way forward then? WION Siddhant Sibal finds out.
Cash is no longer king in Sweden. From getting a parking receipt to paying for your meals, you can get it all done with absolutely no paper money in your wallet. You don't even need to wait in long queues at the cash counter of a shopping mart. All you do is enter a shop, finish your shopping, and then pay through an app or with a card without any human interaction whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, I have seen the whole change happen here in Sweden, where cash used to be everywhere and then suddenly just disappearing more and more. I think it has taken away a lot of friction in consumption, the way of consuming things, buying things, and I think it's very good for, safety in the country.
Sweden's cashless economy is evident in all walks of life. Take, for example, a hotel. You can just book, pay and check in without even going to the hotel reception.
For the most of the times, people pay with credit cards. Our clients is used to use the credit cards, and for us in the reception it's more convenient as well. Then we don't have cash laying around in back here, so for security it's better for us.
80% of all transactions in Sweden are completely cashless. Digital payments are so widely accepted that across the country you see billboards that read, "We don't accept cash."
Because money is very costly to exchange and all the rates and stuff like that, so people are developing a lot of apps or systems where cash is not involved. So it's all about the technology is evolving and doing for us small business owners.
Banks and the society in general are working really hard to make it safe.
The most widely used app in Sweden is called Swish. The country's 7 largest banks launched the services of this mobile payment system in 2012, and as of 2017, the app has over 5.5 million users. But not everyone in Sweden has taken to this form of payment. There are growing concerns in the country that a cashless society will cause problems for the elderly and other vulnerable groups. Some argue that it is also not the safest bet. Experts say that an economy driven completely by technology opens itself up to more risks. While those in favour claim that doing away with cash reduces the risk of crime, specifically robberies, those against a cashless economy argue that it is easy to find loopholes in the digital system and commit fraud. The country stands divided, but one cannot deny that Sweden has been at the forefront of the cashless revolution for the past 2 decades.
Sweden is the most cashless society on this planet. In the year 2016, barely 1% of all the transactions made in this country were made using cash or notes. That's way less than the average in Europe and US, that's 7%. Clearly, Sweden is leading towards a future that the world aspires, and therefore world can learn this from Sweden. With video journalist Ramesh, Siddhant Sibbal, WION, Stockholm.
Europe, meanwhile, has been divided over the influx of migrants who have been entering the continent for decades, especially in recent times, from the embattled West Asia and parts of East Africa. Sweden has not been spared by the migration wave and hosts a substantial migrant population, being largely homogeneous. This has had an impact on the Swedish society.
The European continent has had to contain refugees crossing from the Mediterranean into the mainland right through the northern and the western coast. Sweden and its neighbours have been appealing to the host nations for those seeking the social benefits and stability offered on those shores. In the year 2015 alone, Sweden received over 162,877 asylum applications for a population of barely 10 million people. Sweden has been accepting on an average 40% of these applications according to the official figures. Top of the migrant source countries were Syria and Afghanistan, with mostly unaccompanied minors. In late June 2016, the Swedish Parliament voted for more restrictive policy with a large majority in favour. As a result, residence permits are temporary and the immigration of family members is severely curtailed. The country is also more rigorous on migrants proving their ability to support incoming relatives. These measures are to be valid for the next 3 years. Those who are already in the country have therefore been compelled to integrate and participate in the economy. One of the industries that has welcomed migrants is the hotel industry, where diversity of the workforce is positive for business.
Well, first of all, the immigration has been very positive for us. There are a lot of words in media and so, but for us it has been very, very positive. When all the countries and when the problems came in the Middle East and all these problems occurred, then all countries needed to take responsibility. And I think we are the countries that took the most responsibility, which is wonderful.
A kebab shop in the middle of Stockholm is therefore not an uncommon sight and is one of the signs of migrant integration into the Swedish lifestyle. But not all Swedes are as enthusiastic about the migrant wave. Many worry that this will impact the welfare state as well.
We have quite a developed welfare state with a high proportion of GDP being public expenditure. So right now, actually from a market perspective, there is an initiative to make it less expensive for businesses to employ not just people who have been sort of refugees, but people who have been, for whom it's deemed difficult to get into the labour market.
The complexity of migration for Europe and also the Nordic countries pertains to security. In 2015, Swedish migration authorities reported almost 500 cases of individuals suspected of having terror links or being war criminals. 20 individuals were denied asylum in the year 2015 due to war crimes.
Sweden has a long history of people coming here and settling down here. But recently, immigration in the country has peaked. This has been a security challenge. But beyond the headlines, there are personal stories and reality is quite complex.
4 nations, Germany, Hungary, Sweden and Austria, received around 2/3 of the European Union's asylum applications in the year 2015. Hungary and Austria are opposed to the EU's mandatory quotas on receiving asylum seekers. Germans and Swedes have been more flexible on the issue, often at a political cost. The decline of migrant arrivals in Sweden shows that the country is trying to keep the right balance, doing the best that it can for migrants, but also for its own population. With Siddhant Sibil in Stockholm, Bureau Report, WION.
Destruction can come in many forms. A spring storm brought snow, rain and wind that shut airports and left thousands powerless in the US over the weekend. Here's a report.
What you see on your screen is what the United States woke up to on Sunday. A spring storm pushed in record snowfall, heavy winds, rain and hail, pounding the United States from the Gulf Coast to the Great Lakes. The worst of the snow was focused on the upper Great Lakes, with Green Bay, Wisconsin seeing its second largest snowstorm ever.
My truck's stuck. It's not much we can really do except for plow ourselves out.
In Minnesota, the city of Duluth was hard hit, with snow falling throughout the day. In Michigan, over 300,000 homes and businesses were left without power. According to reports, a 2-year-old girl was killed after a tree fell on a mobile home in Louisiana. While in Wisconsin, a woman was killed after she lost control of her vehicle and rammed into an SUV. The storms dumped snow and ice in Canada as well. Toronto witnessed some 200 traffic accidents over the weekend. More than 750 flights in and out of airports in Minnesota and Toronto were cancelled. With the Met Office predicting more bad weather, it sure looks like residents here are in for a tough time. Bureau Report, WION.